The thing tricks you into believing its lies by first telling you the truth.
Now I'll show you what I already know.
If you've watched John Carpenter's The Thing a bunch of times, you've probably stopped noticing how often the movie makes you assume things without proof. That's because The Thing establishes a cinematic language that conditions the audience to run with their suspicions.
I don't know who to trust.
And it's all supported by tricks as subtle as tiny hidden bulbs lighting the ceiling and painting all of the walls and props gray, to using literal airport runway lights to make you scared of going outside. Combined, these create a paranoia framework that makes the audience as paranoid as the characters.
Paranoia is bouncing off of the four walls until it has nowhere to go except through the fourth wall into the audience.
It's not enough to just show the characters being paranoid. The camera uses the audience's knowledge of how cinematic storytelling works against them, all the way through the blood test scene. And it all comes down to the biggest lie, about 20 minutes where our hero, MacReady, might be the thing, because it makes us suspicious of him before the characters are.
I'm gonna hide this tape when I'm finished. If none of us make it, at least there'll be some kind of record.
This is where the movie starts paying off what it has spent the whole time setting up. 3 shots implicate MacReady: an open door, space for someone to sneak up, the view of someone watching, and fade to black. The first time you watch this, it feels like something big is about to happen, or maybe it just did. This is the first time the camera starts giving you the same cues that were once reliable for something unreliable, which makes you begin to participate in the paranoia. I'll explain and then we'll come back. A big mystery is introduced at the very beginning of the movie. What is up with that dog and why are these guys trying to kill it? That question feeds into isolated shots and slow tracking shots that heighten our suspicion of the dog before the characters suspect anything is wrong. The mystery starts turning into dread and suspense. In an interview with American cinematographer Dean Cundy said, "We wanted the audience to experience the atmosphere as the characters were experiencing it. We wanted to create an unsettling mood even before anything bad happens. Part of that was accomplished with the help of the dog, who is very attached to his trainer and gave a very controlled performance. Every time you see the dog, he's not just sitting there. There's an odd sense of light and a slow camera move. The dog could move slowly and stare in a very piercing way, so we took advantage of that with our own slow camera moves to create a feeling that there was something off right from the beginning." But the question is, will people pick up on it?
They will if you set up that the dog is evil. All you have to do is show him doing this. And people will suspect the dog.
Dramatic irony is when the audience knows more than the characters, like when the split-face corpse moves. But that isn't really the case here. Instead, the camera work implies there's something wrong about the dog even though the characters don't know it, and we don't know it for sure. So let's call it dramatic suspicion. Dramatic suspicion gets applied to the dog in a way that matches what the audience already expects from a monster movie. A spaceship, a helicopter chasing a dog and trying to kill it. So when the dog finally turns, we aren't surprised. We had been filled with anticipation for this moment, and those earlier shots are now confirmed in our heads as simply suspense building. It's just like a con game. Once the movie rewards you for reading a cue correctly, you start believing the same cues everywhere else. It feels like dramatic irony when it isn't. It feels like the camera work was confirming that the dog was infected, not just hinting at it. So now let's go back to MacReady's tape recorder. Up until this point, the movie has been mainly slowly uncovering a mystery. Now they know the thing can take over anyone and imitate them perfectly, and they know at least one person in the group is the thing. Bennings is dead.
Great.
Blair's gone nuts and has been confined to a shack. Someone has sabotaged their ability to make a blood serum test.
Somebody got to the blood! What?
And trust is falling apart.
You guys gonna listen to Gary? You gonna let him give the orders? I mean, he could be one of those things!
MacReady, the person the group trusts the most, has been placed in charge. I ended up mapping the whole movie, including every setup, payoff, and suspicion shift, and put it into a PDF, so if you want the bird's eye view, go to CinemaTyler.com/thing. This little scene of MacReady talking into his tape recorder appears on the surface to be basically recapping the important info, but the subtext being told by the camera is playing out a completely different beat. In the previous scene, MacReady said,
"There's a storm hitting us in 6 hours.
Now MacReady says,
Storm's been hitting us hard now for 48 hours.
That's a huge chunk of time we just don't get to see. Just as the audience is trying to piece together any clues they might have picked up on, the movie throws us back into full ambiguity. Anyone could have gotten infected during that time. Then we get the 3 shots. The first dollies to emphasize the doorway. The second feels off, like we're just waiting for something to fill the empty space. The third shot feels like a POV, and finally it fades to black like an ellipse. Time has passed and we don't know what happened. These shots are communicating to us that MacReady may have just been assimilated off camera. That's the real beginning of the audience's paranoia separate from the characters, and is heightened by a few clever tricks. Cundy makes the outside feel colder by creating a contrast between the warm hue of the interiors and the deep blue of the lights outside the camp. Cundy said, "I found these very intense blue lights used on airport runways. They were balls covered with this very blue glass envelope, and they threw off an otherworldly blue light. The snow would reflect any color we put on it, so that made the outside even bluer and cooler. When these two light sources clash, it creates a feeling of danger and paranoia creeping in. And you'll see what the blue light does to Fuchs in the next scene. After we fade out on MacReady, the very next shot is Fuchs in the lab framed in the foreground with an open doorway in the background. This time, the doorway space is filled, and it's filled by MacReady. They use a split diopter lens so Fuchs in the foreground and MacReady in the doorway are both in focus at the same time. The seam is hidden by the darkness, but still it's a slightly unnatural look. Part of the frame feels like a different depth of field than the rest, and it's perfect here because it makes MacReady's entrance feel off before he even says anything. There's an expectation that MacReady is possibly the thing and about to attack Fuchs. He even looks around as he enters the doorway. Fuchs is startled and grabs a beaker of acid to throw at MacReady. MacReady acts slightly suspicious with his long stares and short sentences. Maybe he's just tired. The beaker of acid allows for the implication against MacReady to stand without him attacking Fuchs. He's either not attacking Fuchs because he'll get acid thrown at him, or simply because he's not infected. After MacReady leaves, the lights go out, and Fuchs has only a single candle to separate himself from the blue light surrounding him. It's as if the flickering flame is signifying how vulnerable he is.
Who's that?
Fuchs isn't the only weird death in the movie. It's time for our segment, What Happened to Knowles? There were storyboards for a version of his death that never made it into the movie. I'll throw them on the screen for a minute while I tell you about today's sponsor, Surfshark VPN. I just moved into my new place, that's what all this stuff is. Surfshark VPN is an app and browser extension that makes your computer appear to be somewhere else in the world. But why? Well, for one, Criterion Channel isn't available in Europe for some reason, so my friends over there use Surfshark to change their location to the US, and they're in. All the big streaming platforms have different catalogs based on where you are in the world, so Surfshark allows you to access everything that isn't streaming in your country. Surfshark also adds an extra layer of protection by encrypting everything sent between your device and the internet, keeping your passwords and personal data secure while blocking ads and handling those annoying cookie pop-ups for you. I probably don't have to tell you that there's never been a better time to get a VPN, and Surfshark stands apart from the rest by offering unlimited simultaneous device connections on a single account. In their security suite, Surfshark One offers even more identity protection with a proxy email and a phone number you can give to those websites you just aren't sure about. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk in trying it out. Just go to surfshark.com/CinemaTyler or use code CinemaTyler at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN. Now let's get back to Fuchs, who's about to go outside. Outside and fully at the mercy of the elements, and the thing, he strikes a flare, a chaotic light source that mirrors the chaos of the wind and snow, and we see just beyond the camp is a black void, further heightening his isolation. Alongside the blue light, the movie uses flares to communicate with us cinematically.
I wanted something different looking as far as how they lit stuff. Only flashlights I thought would be kind of boring. So I thought, well, let's see about flares. And we shot about 6 different ones. The regular roadside flares turned out to be the most interesting because they were very bright, but they had this really unusual magenta color. And so we said, yeah, let's use those.
The blue light is communicating a cold, creeping dread of the unknown. The flares and fire are the opposite. They're warm, violent, and a human tool to combat the cold and darkness. Every time the magenta touches the blue, it creates a visual clash that shows us uncertainty versus action. And in order to kill the thing, they must use their warmest and most chaotic light source. Fuchs spots something in the snow. It's MacReady's torn clothing. MacReady just reminded us of this device in the tape recorder scene.
I think it rips through your clothes when it takes you over.
What has been implied by the camera for the past 3 minutes feels like it has just been confirmed by the camera, and Fuchs' biggest ally might now be a thing. There's a smash cut to MacReady's face.
Anybody see Fuchs?
He is now fully implicated in the mind of the audience. We now expect one of 2 outcomes. Either Fuchs will burst in with the accusation that MacReady is the thing, or MacReady killed him. The audience is now caught between two lies that were expressed non-verbally through framing and editing. MacReady begins splitting up the group to find Fuchs, which now reads as a strategy the Thing might have. There's suspicion on Gary and Copper for possibly sabotaging the blood.
I just give it to Copper whenever he needs it.
As soon as I'm finished, I return it right away.
And there's suspicion on Clark for being around the dog thing for a while.
I said watch Clark. And watch him close, do you hear me?
Palmer puts suspicion on Windows.
Hey, fuck you, Palmer! I'm going with you! Who says I want you going with me? Alright, cut the bullshit!
But this suspicion, without any camera suggestion or evidence, reads like a misdirection, making the audience feel smarter than they are. MacReady, Knowles, and Windows go to Blair hoping for answers, but all they get is more questions.
Funny things. I hear funny things out here.
Did you come across Fuchs?
It ain't Fuchs.
The noose is impossible to miss, and that image juxtaposed against him saying that he's all better now conveys that he's nuts, but it also subtly hints that maybe he was assimilated before he could use it. The movie never confirms this, so you're forced to guess. They find Fuchs's body where the torn clothing was, but this also raises more questions than it answers.
Why would it burn him? Flare! Maybe he tried to burn it! Maybe he burned himself before it could get to him.
And Carpenter just lets those questions build. The human brain hates unresolved questions. It feels like an itch you can't scratch, and each one adds more and more stress to the audience. Unlike most movies, The Thing leaves so much up in the air after it's over. Whose shadow was that? How did Bennings get attacked? Who sabotaged the blood? Who framed MacReady? What exactly happened to Fuchs? When was Blair assimilated? What happened to Knowles? And of course, is Childs infected? The Thing keeps stacking unanswered questions and pushing your focus toward the next threat. You don't have time to be analytical, and that causes you to run with implications. It's how paranoia works in real life. People start trying to fill those gaps with assumptions based on any perceived clue they can find. And 40 plus years later, people are still trying to fill those gaps from this movie.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, of course not.
Before the audience has a chance to really contemplate what is going on, our attention is shifted away to a new mystery. MacReady tells Windows to go back inside because he's going to take Knowles to his shack alone.
What the hell for? Because when I left yesterday, I turned the lights off.
After MacReady and Knowles have been gone for 45 minutes, the group decides to seal off the doors to the outside, and here's where we get our first subtle hint setting up Norris's impending heart attack. Our second heart attack clue is interrupted by Knowles' return, planting the seed while diverting attention away from it. This same technique will be used again later. You might not realize it, but Carpenter and Cundy have been laying the groundwork visually to create a kind of paranoia trap, and these techniques are on full display here. These interiors were built on a soundstage in Los Angeles, and while cinematographers usually leave their sets open at the top in order to hang lights, Dean Cundy, who up until this point had only shot low-budget movies on location, was used to having ceilings, and wanted ceilings and exposed pipes visible in the set to create a feeling of confinement and claustrophobia. Cundy hung these China hat lights to create pockets of brightness and prevent the spaces from being evenly lit during the night scenes. But the problem was that since the cone-shaped light shades pointed the light away from the ceilings became too dark.
So I had the guys put little tiny incandescent bulbs from very small units and attach them to the back of the shades. And they were on dimmers so that, the wires would run over here. We could adjust it so we could light the ceiling without any other lights, because it would be only the ceiling.
This lighting gave the interiors a moody look without feeling cozy, so everything looks the way we were supposed to feel. But it goes even further than that. Production designer John Lloyd had painted all of the walls of the set a light hospital green color. When Carpenter saw it, he had an idea and decided to have basically all of the color replaced with muted grays. The walls and most of the props were repainted gray. Cundy even tested various gray paint to find something extremely neutral. Suddenly, the bleakness of the setting and story began to seep into everything you see. Interestingly, Carpenter and Cundy originally wanted to shoot the movie in black and white, but Universal thought it would hurt the movie when selling it to run on TV. But pulling the color out of a color movie allows you to control how and when color does make an appearance. This made the blue light and flares and fire really stand out, and you'll notice whenever the Thing does show up, the monster is actually the most colorful part of the movie. Even the men's outfits are made from drab, muted colors, and when they put their coats on, this also makes them sort of blend together, which removes their individuality and makes us more paranoid, because it becomes harder to keep track of who is who. This is reflected in how the characters are presented without backstory. Carpenter even said that he didn't know what they were really doing before the thing showed up, aside from their basic roles, which puts all of the weight on the situation of trying to survive the thing. Producer Stuart Cohen said that the purpose was to show them basically bored and on edge with each other. So when the thing arrives, there's no banding together for the greater good. It's all about survival and mistrust. We, the audience, are trapped in this bleak situation with the characters, with their dynamic fully understood within the first couple of scenes.
First goddamn week of winter.
All of these techniques that have been building over the course of the movie finally come to a head here, when the paranoia peaks in the most brilliant way. Knowles comes back and shows the men MacReady's torn-up jumpsuit that he found at the shack, finally implicating him to the group. What we've been anticipating has finally happened. Knowles cut the wire guiding MacReady back to the base, leaving him to freeze to death in the snow. It's implied to be preemptive self-defense, and it feels like a softer way into what is about to happen. The conversation almost immediately shifts from whether MacReady is actually infected to when he was infected.
When do you think it got to him?
I don't know. Could have been any time, anywhere.
Palmer immediately jumps on board. Weirdly, Childs is the only one who doubts Knowles. Palmer questions Windows, but this feels like a misdirect again, giving us the feeling that we can spot the difference. The argument is perfectly interrupted by MacReady trying to open the door, quickly shifting the focus immediately from questioning to jumping to a conclusion based on an assumption.
Nothing human could have made it back here in this weather without a guide light.
Let's open it now.
Why are you so damn anxious to let him in here?
Because it's so close. Maybe our best chance to blow it away.
The question turns to should they burn him to death or let him freeze to death. Windows, with a kind of radical empathy under pressure, questions what they are doing.
Childs! What if we wrong about him?
As MacReady's infection status is questioned again, they hear him breaking into the supply room, and perceived urgency puts an end to this discussion.
All right. We got no choice now.
In a short amount of time, a piece of MacReady's torn clothing, a clue that is still just a theory to the group, has led Knowles to believe that MacReady is the thing and leave him to die in the snow. When MacReady makes it back, it's assumed that it's because he's the thing, which causes the men to believe that MacReady's attempt to save his own life is a direct threat to them, and therefore murder is justified. The paranoia has now escalated to the point where some in the group are now willing to kill without verification. It's just like how real paranoid violence works. A perceived clue leads to questions, which leads to assumptions, which leads to justifying violence.
And Kurt was very good. He's a great technical actor. I would say, it has to be just about eye level, and it has to be 2.5 feet away from your face for the right exposure. And he would hit it every time. Zoop. Interestingly enough, I think we could never use them now because, all that stuff dripping is liquid sulfur. We would never be allowed to use them now. The fire marshal would say, "What are you, crazy?"
You're selling that flare pretty good there, Kurt. You have it right up against your
I know,
face.
I was going to say, Kurt, can you get the flare a little bit high? Well, I'm doing the best I can here. Setting my beard on fire. Yeah.
Yeah. Oof.
Oh, well.
You're doing a good job of kind of hiding part of it, too, except for this part where it's bald. But, boy, it looks good. It was a really nice job there. Yeah, you're hiding it with your body. They lifted a little bit there.
Yeah. How did that work?
Now, you just dropped it down so it didn't flare the camera lens. Cundy was yelling at you all the time.
But the flares did cause the lens flares, and this adds a subtle bit of immersion in the story. Because while the cinematography isn't calling attention to the camera itself like it does in other movies, when a lens flare does happen, it feels accidental. And there's this little trigger in the back of your mind that tells you that a camera is present, and these events are unfolding in front of it like a documentary. Much like what the practical effects are doing on a less subtle level, these lens flares are reminding us that everything we are seeing is tangible. The actors may be acting that there is an alien threat, but they are not acting when it comes to the heat of the flares or fire, just as they are not acting that the air is cold enough for their breath to be visible. And some shots were lit entirely by flares that were held by the actors. When this happens, the lighting isn't controlled by the invisible hand of the cinematographer or even the actor really. It's controlled by the character in the story.
Where's the rest?
Not breathing. One time, Doc.
When Norris has a heart attack, it feels like a payoff to those two clues instead of being suspicious. So now we're fully primed for the movie's biggest twists, misdirections that only work because you're already paranoid. Up to this point, Norris has probably been the least suspicious. He's not combative, he refuses leadership, he's friendly, and seems weak. MacReady is barely hanging on to control. Everyone is against him and he's framed like a cornered animal. He also brought everyone into the same room, so even if the audience is doubting that MacReady is infected, the ones with heavy accusations against them are now untied and confined to the same room. The audience knows a big reveal is coming. Carpenter's use of anamorphic lenses allows for more dynamic blocking that feels tighter and more intense. Cundy said, "The anamorphic aspect ratio was very consciously discussed as an effective way to capture so many characters and make them feel confined in the frame. John was a very big proponent of trying to get one shot to fulfill the needs of a scene. Norris's heart attack is a big moment and could feel suspicious, but Carpenter uses dramatic irony against us again. Clark picks up a scalpel and MacReady doesn't see, in another split diopter shot. The question of what's happening with Norris suddenly shifts to what will happen when Clark attacks MacReady, which feels more urgent. The defibrillator is used once, shifting our focus back to Norris, but there's no payoff, so it cues us that it's safe to ignore Norris and focus on Clark just before the big reveal.
Clear! Clear.
Great.
The Thing didn't like getting zapped. In the original movie, the Thing dies by electricity. The bright colors of the Thing make it feel more alien against the muted grays of the set. Norris's head coming off and trying to escape reads as simply grotesque, and the audience doesn't realize that this is setting up the next scene. Palmer points out the head and MacReady torches it, which pulls the suspicion away from both of them as we move into the scene that got Carpenter to sign on to the movie in the first place. Here, Gary, Clark, and Childs are the most combative and the most suspicious. A split diopter is used again to finish the scalpel beat. The suspense of Clark's scalpel competes with the tension of MacReady's threats to Childs, heightening them both because we don't know which one will boil over. It's the scalpel and Clark is killed. Clark's death shows us how real the threats are and how dangerous the situation is. But after seeing a seemingly lifeless Norris bite someone's arms off, a dead Clark is still a potential threat.
This is bullshit, Mac.
Finish it, Palmer.
They're dead, Mac.
MacReady reveals that the blood test idea is a direct result of the previous scene, and plants our expectation for what a positive test will look like.
My blood from one of you things won't obey when it's attacked. It'll try and survive.
Windows now seems to be the least suspicious, which kind of makes him suspicious. And Carpenter leans into this with a look on Windows' face during his test. Windows uses the same scalpel on everyone, and is seen just wiping the scalpel on his jeans before cutting himself. Because this isn't a plot point, and because it would make the whole scene purposeless and would destroy the conflict that makes the movie entertaining, I think we can throw the contamination theory out the window. MacReady tests negative, but we don't know if we can believe it.
It's a crock of shit.
The prop hand that is used for the positive test is first used with the negative test, throwing the audience off of that as a cue. With audience anticipation at an all-time high, the suspense rises even higher when we get a negative test after negative test. We are sure someone is the Thing, and with Copper and Clark dead and negative, the person most likely to be the Thing is Gary, who had the best opportunity to sabotage the blood. When it's Palmer's turn, Gary doubts the test and MacReady plants a setup that Gary's test will be the biggest reveal, saying,
"You were the only one that could have got to that blood. We'll do you last."
Which makes sense because the more negative tests you have, the more allies you have to fight whoever is positive. The audience's focus has been pulled completely away from Palmer's test, and then we get the reveal. Now the audience knows the test is viable and MacReady has been fully vindicated. Of course, not seeing MacReady cut himself leaves it a bit open-ended, but for all intents and purposes, we'll say that this is his vindication. But where the movie gets even more brilliant is after you already know the answer and watch it again. We'll get into that in just a second. As you can probably tell, I've been obsessed with how the Thing weaves in all these setups, payoffs, suspicion shifts, and turns, which is why I spent months mapping out every scene, character arc, story engine, and plot thread to get a look under the hood at how the Thing controls information and directs attention. I put it all together in a PDF that shows you exactly what makes the story work. You can get it for $5, but if you join my Patreon at the $5 level, you'll get the PDF and all the other bonus videos and PDFs I've made. Once you've seen the movie and know MacReady isn't the Thing, you see the movie differently and the techniques read differently. The open door and negative space behind him now reads like someone is watching him and is going to frame him. The scene with Fuchs now reads as paranoia, making people mistrust MacReady. Finding the torn clothing reads as dramatic irony that the Thing has taken a concrete step to frame MacReady, and he doesn't know that the group is about to turn on him. In this scene, Palmer and Norris are infected and everyone else is human. We get a two-shot of the Things as Palmer Thing immediately jumps on board. Now it seems like Palmer Thing has been pushing the paranoia by riling up Windows, who has no hint of suspicion against him.
Childs! What if we're wrong about him?
Why then we're wrong?
It's an exchange that somehow hits harder every year. I'd like to think that MacReady heard them, which led to him enlisting Windows during the blood test and nearly killing Childs. Now, this entire 20-minute chunk of the movie is our protagonist going through his most intense trial. He not only has to deal with the threat of the Thing and his own paranoia, but the paranoia directed at him. He's fully isolated, fighting the Thing, the Cold, and the humans. He once had control of the group as its leader, and now he has lost that control. And when they literally chop down the door to kill him, and he's caught between the freezing cold of the outside and the mob out for blood, he saves his life and takes back control with one decisive action. He lights a flare. It's kind of hard to imagine now, but when the Thing came out, it really disturbed people. And the scene that disturbed them the most was, of course, the kennel scene. It actually made a woman barf in front of the studio head's wife during the first preview screening. Now we watch the Thing and it's basically an action thriller. There's a reason behind this, and you can watch the full story behind the making of the kennel scene and its fallout here. It's completely nuts. A man nearly drowned in goo. I also made a bonus video on how Benning's death scene was changed a couple times that is available right now on Patreon for $1, and it will go into the $5 archive when my next video goes up.